Hi, and welcome back to Starship Simulator for just a quick one today. This won't be of interest to everyone, but yesterday I made myself a little tool, and I figured I would make it available to anyone who was interested. Flying around to different planets, it was bugging me that I had no idea how close I should park the ship. So I did some basic research and made a little Excel spreadsheet for myself to calculate how far I should set up orbit. It's completely optional, and actually may only be useful for a short time, depending on how far away orbital mechanics are from getting added to the tech demo. But in case others would like to make use of it, I've added it to the download folder with my other procedures. And that, of course, will be a link to that will be down below in the description. A couple of points on this, though. First of all, there are no actual orbits simulated yet. You literally just park the ship above the planet, or manually orbit for a short time. When all that becomes more realistic in future updates, the Helm computer will calculate all this for you and hold proper speed to maintain the orbit. We can already see there is a button for selecting orbits on the Helm, although it's inoperative, it's only set at standard at the moment. So my assumption is that we'll see the same type or similar types of altitude options as I'm presenting here, because these are based on standard real orbits, at least around the Earth. Until all that gets added, though, you can use the tool for manual approaches. Secondly, I am no expert in orbital mechanics. They are insanely complex equations, and every planetary body has a ton of its own factors that need to be accounted for. Luckily, all that can be simplified for sci-fi use, and I actually found a page from a well-known 1975 Star Trek technical manual that specifies that a standard orbit in that universe is right around 40% of the planet's radius. While I want to move away from comparing this game to Trek, because I love how the game is maturing and starting to evolve into its own style and personality and canon, there's also no point in reinventing the wheel if other sci-fi nerds already did the work 50 years ago. I found additional information just on Wikipedia on real Earth orbits, and did some math to figure out what all the types of orbits would be in terms of percentage of a planet's radius, and the 40% of Trek lore fits in pretty well, right in the medium orbit range. So let's take a look at the tool, quote unquote tool, real quick, and then just look at a couple of the illustrations that I had found that I based this all on. We'll talk through it real quick, and then I'll just show it in operation a few times, and that'll be that. So let's dive into that now. Okay, and here's the calculator itself. It's just a couple of cells here with some basic math functions going on. You have a blue field that you input your target planet radius in, which is given to us by the sensors and by the Helm. So you just input that, and then the yellow column is going to calculate our low orbit distance, standard, and geosynchronous orbits. And then below it are some basic reference points that I use to remind myself of where I got these numbers and how some of the math was done. So, for example, we know that Earth radius is 6,371 kilometers. So if we input that here, we gotta click to open it up. You have to double click a couple times just to get the actual field highlighted. But then if we actually put that in, 6371, the graph is going to calculate all of our distances for it, and we can actually double check by looking here. So low orbit comes in at 1975.01, and actual low Earth orbit is considered anything less than 2,000 kilometers. So we're basically there. What's 15 kilometers between friends? But that is calculating the 31% approximately of the planet radius. This is mechanic math. This is not exact math. This is just good enough to get by in the real world, especially considering that we don't have fully simulated orbital mechanics anyway. So low orbit is anything less than 31% of a planet's radius, or of Earth radius. So basically what I did is I took all of these and then I calculated what that percentage is of each of the orbits, and then apply the percentage to any other planet. So that's not taking into account anything like density, gravity, rotation speed, any of the things you would actually worry about. It's just alone based on radius of the planet, which as we mentioned, is how other sci-fi franchises have handled it. Works decently well to get the job done. Medium orbit is anything between 31 and 561%. So it's actually, medium orbit is an enormous range, and it's anything between the low orbit and geosynchronous orbit, or basically anything less than high orbit, because high orbit will be anything over that 561%, which in Earth's case is 35,786 kilometers. That's geosynchronous, which is interesting, because before I looked it up, I just assumed that geosynchronous meant that you were stationary over the planet at any altitude, but it turns out that that altitude is specific, and it's actually quite far away. And we'll look at the graph for that in a second, but let's just do another example real quick. Let's say you had, I'll double click to open it up. There we go. So I saw a planet the other day that was 20,000 kilometers in radius. So if we input that, now we see that we are significantly further away from the surface, but it tells us that we'll be, low orbit would be 6,200 kilometers. Standard, again going at that 40%, is going to be around 8,000. Geosynchronous orbit would be 112,000 kilometers out. Super far away. Now the difference, in case you have not pieced it together, for these two items is that we've got target distance from surface. So this is what your actual altitude is above the surface of the planet, above the ground. However, in the game, we do not have an actual above ground indication. What we have is a total distance from center. In fact, let's get back into the game and meander over to the helm real quick. So we have a target radius, which would give us some distance in kilometers. It gives us an approach distance. So the distance here would read out in kilometers above the very center of whatever planetary body you have targeted. So it's not reading in above ground, it's reading from the very center, which is not a huge deal, because you would simply add your target radius, which we already know. So we would add the target radius to whatever these calculations are, so 6,200. So guess what? That's what the final yellow column is doing. It's just adding everything together so that you don't have to do that math in your head, because it can get cumbersome with all of these larger numbers. The other thing I have it doing is this also gets rid of, this rounds up or down to get rid of the decimal points, so it just makes a nice clean number. So this is what you would be looking at on your helm to position yourself properly. So where did these numbers come from? Well, let's look at two items here. So these are just from Wikipedia. I mean, great place to start for information. This is a very busy diagram, but what it is telling us is it gives us a height above sea level here, which would be distance from the surface. It gives us the hours of how long a particular orbit takes, and it also gives us the radius of the orbit and orbital speed. It also shows us, it's a little harder to see, but it does show us the different ranges of the different orbits. So all the way out here we have geostationary or geosynchronous. Those are interchangeable. Then you've got the middle Earth orbit, and then here's low Earth orbit, which includes International Space Station, Hubble, and various other satellites. So the idea behind an orbit, at its most basic, is that when you're in orbit, you are constantly falling because you're being affected by gravity, right? But because you have forward motion, you have achieved a speed that is just over you falling beyond the curvature of the Earth constantly, and then you go around in a circle. So the distance from the Earth would determine what that speed is, or what that distance would be. So that's why you can see here with the orbital period, these smaller orbits are quite fast. In fact, this is only, what is that, 2, 3, so that's a 2-hour mark there. Here's the 1-hour mark right around where these low orbits are, out to 5 hours. As you go further out from the Earth, your speed actually decreases, and you can see here the orbital speed dropping from 15,000 miles per hour, or I guess let's look at kilometers per hour, because we're doing metrics here, from 25,000 kilometers an hour all the way down to only 11,000. as you get further out, because you don't need the same amount of speed in order to miss the Earth as you go out. Of course, as that radius gets bigger, the time gets higher. So geostationary means that you're over the exact same spot all the time, which means you would have to be on a 24-hour orbit, which means you end up way the hell out here, only doing around 11,000 kilometers per hour, but that's your 24-hour radius. Now, of course, what that works out to be, because it is so far away, this for Earth in particular, again, that 35,786 kilometers is 561% of the Earth's radius. So that's why it ends up being so far out. Obviously, this becomes somewhat meaningless then for other planets, because not every planet is going to have the same rotation. If you had a faster rotation, then obviously you would be closer in, and if it was even slower, you would be further out. So that is not taken into account here, but it does give you a ballpark figure of where such a thing might be, at least on a standard 24-hour clock. So, take that for what it is and whatever you will, but it does give you an idea of how far away geosynchronous or geostationary might be from a planet. So if you wanted to set up far away. And that was really the whole point of this, was I was coming into planets and realizing that I didn't know if I was too close, if I was too far. I just wanted something to sort of gauge what might be realistic looking, to get a feel of how big the planet would be outside the window. So we see here that while it's not necessarily accurate, it is going to give us that ballpark idea. Now, if we look at the other illustration here, this gives us a much clearer idea of just what the different orbits are, and that's essentially low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and geo Earth orbit. And again, this just gives you some basic numbers where here's the radius and height of these particular orbits. And I guess actually radius would essentially be equivalent to distance from the center, which is what we are calculating for the final orbital distance, because that's where our sensors are marking. So we would be from the middle out to whatever that radius is. So that sort of is what this is. But mainly this just, for me, this helped visualize what these different orbits are considered. Where's my thing here? So again, we have the low Earth orbit is considered anything less than 2,000 kilometers. So it's all very, very close right in. And we saw, in fact, very fast, in Earth's case, 1 to 2 hours per orbit. It's quite fast. Then we get out to medium Earth orbit, which although here, let's get rid of that. This one. This shows sort of a narrow band. According to the text, medium Earth orbit is considered anything between low orbit of 2,000 kilometers and geo orbit of 35,786. Take the Earth out of it and ignore those numbers and just concentrate on the percentages, because these are the ones that would apply in our case. Medium is anything between 31 and 561%. And then geosync orbit is going to be 561%. And then high orbit is considered anything above the geosynchronous line. So in Earth's case, anything more than 35,786. For my case here in the game, 561%. And realistically, I guess it would be considered anything higher than the geosync line for whatever the actual planet is. So with all of the real calculations with rotation, you would figure out what that geosync line is, and then anything above that, I guess, would be considered high orbit. So those are the categories that I have applied here. And that's what we see here. Maybe that has over-explained things at this point just a little bit, but this is where I've made many assumptions, and this is where those assumptions have come from, is just understanding some stuff about basic orbit setup. Back in the game here, why don't we just choose a random couple of planets and just visit them and put this into actual use. So what do we have nearby? We have... Here's just a regular terrestrial planet. We've sent that to the helm. Oops, we need to use the sensor target. and then we'll engage our auto navigation. So we're on our way in. We have a couple of things set up here. Approach mode is standard, which again, orbital positioning, we would have some buttons here to change this. The fact that it says standard may indicate that it is similar to or exactly the same as the Star Trek standard of 40%, but I would imagine that we would see other modes like low orbit, geo orbit, and high orbit. From discussions about it, it seems like the computer is going to handle those calculations and controls for us. All right, we are shown what type of planet it is, so we'll have a silicate terrestrial planet, and key is our target radius of 2644. So, going back to our little guy here, oh, hold on one second so we can see it. Okay, so we have a target radius of 2644. So we say, I want to park in a standard orbit above that planet. What would that possibly be? Well, we go in here, double click to get that actuated. Come on, give me the field. We go 2644. And now we have our calculations. So standard orbit is going to be 3702. So just over 3,700 kilometers above the surface. If we wanted to do low orbit, we would do 3464. If we wanted to do a non-standard medium orbit, it would be anything between 3464 and 17477. So it would be anywhere in between there, because that's what geosynchronous is here, 17477, and if high orbit would be anything greater than that. So we're about 45 seconds away from our planet. We want distance here to end up reading 3,702 kilometers. And I've been coming in, I've been letting the autopilot work into about 15 or 10% power, and then I take over manually and get us into a standard left-hand pattern. So let's see if that's going to do it here. Okay, we're just under 1.2 light years now. There's 1 light year. We'll talk about the orbit here in a second. Okay, dropping down, here comes the power. Here's the other heavenly bodies in the system going by. There's the star. Here comes the planet awfully fast. Let's get down to 10. 37. Oh, and we just went under it. That fast. So that was a poor approach. So I just inch back out, and we're watching the numbers go back up. You can see how fast we are covering kilometers here. So the distance between, or that difference of 15 kilometers in the calculations from earlier, the 31% versus whatever decimal amount of percents really does not make a difference, because you can make up a 15 kilometer difference really, really fast. But anyways, here we are. We've now disengaged. We are within a couple kilometers of where we needed to be. But this is it. This would be standard orbital of this planet. You can see it's pretty big. Like, we're fairly close, but not so close that we are uncomfortably close, or that even the textures are sort of wonky, you know. So that's that. In fact, if we wanted to re-engage and hold ourselves in an orbit here manually, we would just adjust our yaw a little bit to stay right around that 3709. We can even drop it down to 0 field power. We're still doing 30 kilometers a second. So we could hold it in manual orbit here for as long as we wanted, or until we got around to the side that we wanted for light and picture taking, if that's what you're here for. Okay, so anyways, that's just one example. Let's max out of here. See ya. And let's just pick another random planet just to do some other calculations on. Let's see, anything interesting out here? Here we go. Here's a Earth-like terrestrial planet here in this K-class star 5001K. So we send... I guess that's the temperature. So now we have a new target, a new sensor target. We'll have a standard approach mode, target radius of 3304. It's actually quite small. Remember, Earth is about 67 or 6,300 kilometers. Here's 3,300 kilometers. It's about half the size. But like before, we can just enter that in our handy-dandy little chart. And we say 3304. Standard orbit is going to be 4626 with a low orbit of 4328. So that's the interesting thing. As you get smaller planets, because it's percentage based, the different orbits will actually be much closer together. We don't see as much of a wide range as we do on a larger planet. So it's only a 300-ish kilometer difference between low and standard orbit. Geosynchronous orbit is only 21,000, almost 22,000 kilometers, which is more than 10,000 kilometers less than Earth's geosynchronous orbit. So because it's percentage based, you don't see the wider ranges on smaller planets because it's all taking a percentage off of the radius. All right, there's the star and the other planets in the system. There's the star there. We're right by, watching the field power coming down. So again, I've been disconnecting it at around 15 or 10%. We'll go with 10 here. So we do, there's 10%. Then we're going to aim for sort of the imaginary line in space where we think that orbit might be, and then we're going to come down to 4626. Now the left-hand pattern that was specified in the Star Trek manual is interesting because it's not just about orbiting, it's also about traffic control. Now that doesn't really matter if you are coming into a dead planet with no one around it, but looky here, we have discovered an Earth-like planet that has a huge amount of civilization on it. This is a packed planet, and the possibility of other starships being in orbit makes it very important that you, for safety reasons, control the flow of traffic around any particular planet. Now, if you're dealing with an alien race for the first time, then maybe they have different preferences. Maybe they do a right-hand pattern, but I found it interesting because I think that left-hand pattern, if you look at the diagram, if you happen to go looking for it, it looks very much like an aviation-based left-hand traffic pattern. It even has a leg that's like the entry leg at 45 degrees, which in aviation, that's how we get into traffic patterns. You come 45 degrees into the downwind leg. Of course, there's no legs on a circular pattern, but it does show, an arrow coming in at about 45 degrees, and that's how you make your entry into this left-hand pattern. So it seems like left-hand is the standard. Of course, you can use whatever you prefer, whatever you want. But here we're in the left-hand pattern, and so then we've done it. We've slid into orbit here above a heavily populated planet. This is a lot of lights. I've seen other Earth-likes with civilization on it. I feel like this is the highest percentage of like cities and development down below that I've seen. The other planets were a lot more sparse. Again, we can kick this on and make a manual orbit around to get over to the light side. 46. 26, so just very slight control adjustments will send us slightly inside the orbit and then slightly outside. But yeah, so that's how the tool works. Just any planet that you're going to, you just input that target radius. It will give you an idea of where you might want to park the ship. And of course, you can always adjust that as you see fit. Maybe you don't want to use 40% as your standard. Maybe you want to be further out. Do a 50% or even a 60%. You can always adjust the functions and just change the math. Actually, you don't even have to change the functions. You would just go in here and change the radius, because all the math is taking B7, cell B7, to do the calculations. So if you just change this, you could put this in to be whatever you wanted, and then it would change that. So that's the tool. It's, like I said, it's available in the download folder that I have all of my other procedures in. So it's free for the taking and the using if you want to do that. So because the sun is actually way above us, we know that we are not anywhere near the equatorial plane. But if we come back up and kind of just put the star in front of us and look for try to line the star up with the thickest part of the planet, right? There's the terminator, and we're coming around onto the morning side of the planet. So how about that? How pretty is that? So thanks for watching, and I hope you maybe found this tool to be useful or interesting, or maybe you just learned a little bit about orbital mechanics that you didn't know before. I know I did, just by looking some stuff up to figure out how all this works. Best of luck out there in your planetary approaches and orbits, and I'll see you next time.